Of all the warriors to have ever been associated with the Dark Angels chapter of the Adeptus Astartes, the man known simply as Cypher is perhaps the most notorious. As one of the Fallen, those members of the original Dark Angels Legion that turned traitor during the events of the Horus Heresy, Cypher is a figure that is both loathed and reviled by his loyalist kin, who in turn seek to either kill or capture this so-called Lord of the Fallen in order to make him repent for his supposed crimes. Indeed, wherever Cypher himself goes, carnage and confusion will inevitably follow in his wake, with his mere presence seemingly serving as the catalyst that stokes any embers of mistrust and resentment within a world's population into a full-scale inferno of bloodshed and strife. And yet, while Cypher is commonly regarded by his fellow Dark Angels as an enemy of the Imperium, the truth, much like everything else regarding this enigmatic individual, is a lot more complicated. While it is true that Cypher has slain many loyal servants of the Imperium, and has even been witnessed fighting alongside Chaos Space Marine warbands on multiple occasions, he has also been known to come to the aid of Imperial forces in their times of need. In the case of the latter, this would even lead to Cypher playing a pivotal role during the events of the Terran Crusade, for it was he, with the aid of the Eldari Harlequin Salandri Veilwalker, who successfully freed the Ultramarines Primarch Rabute Guilliman from his incarceration at the hands of the Red Corsairs. Regardless, whenever Cypher makes his appearance known, it's reasonable to assume that the Dark Angels will not be far behind, as they have hunted and pursued their quarry for close to 10,000 years. Despite the chapter's best efforts, however, Cypher always finds a way to slip through their proverbial fingers, and even on the rare occasions where someone does manage to apprehend him, the Lord of the Fallen never remains in captivity for long, regardless as to whether his jailers are mere baseline humans, veteran space marines, or even the elite custodian guard of the Emperor himself. And even though Cypher's repeated appearances throughout the galaxy occur seemingly at random, the Dark Angels, and in particular their librarians, believe that there is indeed a pattern to his actions, even if Cypher's ultimate objective is one that is yet to be deduced by the chapter. However, for a time, it was believed that this objective was somehow tied to the mysterious sword that Cypher always carries upon his person, one that he never draws in combat, which many have assumed to be the broken remnants of the Lion Sword, a weapon that had once been wielded by none other than Lionel Johnson, the very Primarch of the Dark Angels. But perhaps the biggest mystery surrounding Cypher is in regards to his identity. So just who exactly is Cypher? It is important to know that Cypher is not actually a name given to a particular individual, but rather a title, one which originated within the ranks of the Order, a brotherhood of knights native to the Dark Angels' ancestral homeworld of Caliban. Historically, the bearer of this title, known formally as the Lord Cypher, would be tasked with upholding and maintaining the traditions of the Order, serving as a living embodiment of their very customs and ideals. During the later years of the Horus Heresy and the subsequent Siege of Terra, the title of Cypher was held by a Dark Angels librarian named Zahario El-Zurias, who, despite aiding loyalist forces in their defense of the Astronomicon, was one of several Dark Angels who was loyal to neither the Imperium nor Horus. Zahario, under the guise of Cypher, would not only fight as a part of a contingent of Dark Angels under the command of Captain Paladin Corswain, but it was thanks to his actions, alongside those of fellow librarians Tandarian and Azradale, that a psychic miasma projected by Captain Typhus of the Death Guard was repelled just long enough for the Astronomicon itself to be reignited, allowing for loyalist reinforcements from the Ultramarines Legion to finally re-establish contact with Terra. While Zahario was indeed the most well-known individual to have taken up the mantle of Cypher, there is some doubt as to whether or not he is the same Cypher who was active during the 41st millennium. During the final hours of the Siege of Terra, as detailed within the novel The End and the Death Volume 3, Zahario will be grievously wounded in his battle against Typhus, in where his torso was torn open by the traitor's power scythe. Now admittedly, it is certainly possible that such a wound was not a fatal one, as Space Marines are well known for being capable of withstanding the kinds of physical trauma that would easily kill a regular human many times over. What also supports the idea of Sahariel surviving the Siege of Terra, even if only loosely, is that according to the novel Luther, First of the Fallen, Luther, the arch-traitor of the Dark Angels Legion, recalls hearing reports of Cypher fighting against Corswain during the fall of Caliban. However, the veracity of such a claim is somewhat dubious, as Luther himself admits that his memories of such events are vague and ultimately unreliable. Even then, Luther would also go on to state that if Cypher had been cornered by and subsequently forced to fight Corswain, it would have been extremely unlikely for Cypher to have survived such an encounter, as shown with the following quote.
I have no idea. I don't recall seeing him die. That does not mean it did not happen. I have a recollection, vaguely, of hearing that he had been cornered by Corswain. If true, it seems unlikely he had left the encounter if Corswain survived.
In addition, given the intense seismic activity and landslides that occurred following the reactivation of the Astronomicon, which resulted in the deaths of numerous traitors and loyalists alike, in addition to not just the severity of Sahariel's injuries, but the fact they were caused by a weapon known to have been tainted by various toxins and poisons, it's equally likely that this iteration of Cypher had indeed met his end at the hands of Typhus. So if Sahariel did in fact die, then who else could have possibly taken up the mantle of Cypher? One possibility is that the current incarnation of Cypher is none other than Corswain. While this idea is admittedly fairly unlikely, there are a few pieces of circumstantial evidence which could very well allude to such a possibility. The first of which, as detailed within the previously mentioned novel First of the Fallen, is that when Luther spoke to Mordoran, the then chapter master of the Dark Angels, of his vague recollection regarding the duel between Cypher and Corswain, Mordoran was described as giving an odd look to Luther, one which the traitor could not decipher, but was nonetheless tied directly to his mention of Corswain. While it's certainly reasonable to assume that this look may have been in relation to Corswain's potential death, it's equally plausible that Mordoran may have instead recalled how Corswain had instead simply vanished without a trace. After all, Corswain's final fate following the destruction of Caliban is currently unknown, although we do know that, despite his high standing within the Legion, he did not become the inaugural chapter master of the modern-day Dark Angels, as that particular honor fell to a warrior named Farith Redloss. The second piece of evidence that can be used to loosely support the idea of Corswain becoming Cypher comes from the novel The Eye of Ezekiel. When Ezekiel, the chief librarian of the modern-day Dark Angels chapter, was subjected to visions of both past and future events by a demonic entity, he bore witness to not only the fall of Caliban, but also, somewhat surprisingly, an interaction between Lionel Johnson and Cypher mere moments prior to the Primarch's supposed death, one where the Lion appeared to entrust Cypher with carrying out an important mission, as shown with the following passage.
Ezekiel looked on in silence as the third figure entered the great hall of the tower, robed like the captive in the first cell within the Eye of Terror. Upon seeing the dying Primarch, he stopped in his tracks, arms hanging limp at his side. The noise of the raging warp storm was broken by the sound of a bolt pistol falling from one hand and hitting the stone floor, a plasma pistol dropping out of his other. Slowly, he approached the Lion, sinking to his knees beside the giant figure. The Primarch, aware of the newcomer's presence, spoke softly. "Come closer. There are things I must tell you. A task you must complete." The robed figure pulled back his hood and leaned in close to the Lion. Though Ezekiel could see his Primarch's lips move, he could not make out what was said. "If it's any consolation," the demon said, ruining the moment, "I don't know what he said either." His final words imparted, the Lion breathed his last and the robed figure fell upon his Primarch's breast, weeping the tears of angels. Ezekiel wished he could turn away, to allow the stranger to grieve in private, This was all part of the demon's torment, to force him to watch regardless. Composing himself, the figure rose to his knees, carefully placing his fingertips on the lion's face and closing his dead eyes. Then, as if sensing the presence of others, he jerked alert, turning his head to look right at where Ezekiel and the demon were positioned. "Time to take our leave," the demon said, a little panicked. "Too much knowledge can be a bad thing."
Because the Primarch not only appeared to recognize, but trusted this version of Cypher enough to task him with one final secret mission, it's possible that this individual was in fact Korswain after the latter had taken on the identity of Cypher. Indeed, Korswain was well known to be one of Lionel Johnson's most trusted lieutenants, even to the point where he commanded a significant portion of the Legion's assets during the latter years of the Horus Heresy, in where he served as the Lion's Seneschal. However, while the idea of Korswain being the current Cypher is certainly an intriguing one, there are multiple issues with this particular hypothesis. The first and most obvious issue is that the individual seen in Ezekiel's vision is armed with both a bolt pistol and plasma pistol, two weapons that serve as the signature armaments of Cypher himself. Korswain, by contrast, was never known for dual-wielding pistols in combat, with his preferred weapon of choice instead being that of a large Terranic greatsword. That being said, however, there is nothing to disprove the possibility of Korswain simply looting such weaponry from Cypher's corpse after losing his own weapon during their duel, although it should be noted that the Sword of Korswain does still remain in the possession of the modern-day Dark Angels chapter, with it being currently wielded by a Black Knight of the Raven Wing named Sabriel. The second, and perhaps bigger problem presented by this vision, is the fact that said vision was provided by a demon, and thus it cannot be verified as to whether or not such a vision was a true account of historical events, or was simply an elaborate attempt at deception. Thirdly, it's entirely possible that if, as mentioned earlier, Luther's vague recollection of Cypher and Korswain meeting in battle is indeed accurate, that Korswain, despite his superior martial prowess, could have still fallen to Cypher, even if only due to the latter managing to land a lucky blow. If this were the case, then this could very well explain the strange look that Mordoran gave Luther regarding the fate of Korswain, as Korswain could have been listed within the chapter's historical records as having been killed in action at some indeterminate point in time, a detail which Luther himself would have been completely unaware of. As such, given the lack of any substantial evidence, the notion of Korswain being the current Cypher would appear to be a dubious one at best. Alternatively, instead of Zahariel or Korswain being the modern-day Cypher, perhaps the title had instead been taken up by another fallen angel. After all, even though Zahariel was supposedly slain at the hands of Typhus, a version of Cypher was, as mentioned earlier, reported to have been present during the fall of Caliban. If this particular individual was not only a different Cypher from Zahariel, but also managed to survive his duel against Korswain, then it's entirely possible that this unknown Dark Angel still retains the mantle of Cypher to this day. While it would initially seem unlikely for an Astartes from the time of the Horus Heresy to survive into the present day, even with the longevity afforded by Space Marine physiology, it's important to remember that with the destruction of Caliban, which in itself was caused in part by a warp space rift that tore the world asunder, the majority of the Fallen would be scattered across time and space, with many of their number being hurled forward through time. An example of this, as detailed within the novel The Lion, Son of the Forest, is shown with a fallen angel named Zabriel, who, according to his own estimates, was transported roughly 9,500 years into the future. But even then, it's entirely possible that the title of Cypher could have been bestowed to countless fallen angels over the millennia. Indeed, such an idea could very well explain the erratic nature of Cypher's various appearances throughout the galaxy over the past 10,000 years, with each incarnation of Cypher seeking to accomplish their own respective missions and objectives, whatever they may be. Ultimately, while there are many possible candidates for Cypher's identity, it seems unlikely that we will ever learn the truth regarding this most mysterious of fallen angels. What do you think? leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.